My name is Pete Bronsky. I work in marketing and communications with City Now and the Energy Solutions Group at Panasonic Enterprise Solutions. And I'm joined today by a panel of 4 distinguished panelists. I'd like to introduce them to kick off our webinar today. So from left to right, we have Andre Guin with Xcel Energy. Andre is a mechanical engineer with over 20 years of experience in the energy industry, encompassing product and product management, technical consulting, and strategic development, often focused on energy management, renewable energy, and demand response programs. Next to Andre is Scott Morrissey from Denver International Airport. Scott is the airport's Senior Director for Sustainability at Denver International Airport, which is the 18th busiest airport in the world and the 6th busiest in the country, serving more than 58 million passengers per year. Scott is responsible for developing and improving systems that support the cost-effective achievement of the airport's sustainability goals through their environmental, energy, asset management, and noise teams. Next to Scott is Dr. Bry Matthias Hodge with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado. Bry is the laboratory's manager of the Power System Design and Studies Group, and he is an expert in renewable energy modeling, simulation, forecasting, and integration. And finally, next to Bry is George Karianis with Panasonic City Now. George leads Panasonic City Now Smart Cities team, focused on solutions in North America. George has over 25 years of experience in emerging technology and sustainable solutions, including smart city and smart grid. George is also a LEED accredited professional. So gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for the webinar.
Thanks, Pete.
So we are broadcasting today from Peña Station Next out in Denver, Colorado. And so wanted to kick off the discussion this morning simply by orienting the viewers to exactly where we are. So we're out in Denver, Colorado right now. Peña Station Next is a 382-acre transit-oriented development. In April of 2016, Denver opened a new rail line connecting downtown Denver with the airport. And at the 61st and Peña stop along that rail line, you would find Peña Station Next. And it is really being built up as a smart, sustainable, connected community that is a living laboratory and a showcase. So that's really where we're coming from, both literally and figuratively. And so as a transit-oriented development that's focused on innovation, on working as a living laboratory, Peña Station Next, in a lot of ways, I think, is joining a growing trend around innovation districts, net zero energy districts. The Brookings Institution, for one example, has cited this growing trend of innovation districts as the new frontier for urban development and urban redevelopment. So Bri, I'd like to go to you first, leveraging NREL's history with net zero energy districts and what you're seeing. What kind of trends are you seeing with innovation districts and the like?
So we're certainly seeing large increases in the number and the interest in these, all the way from the city level. A lot of cities are very interested in going to 100% renewable energy or carbon neutral or net zero energy, all the way down through the district level, and then into more on the power system side, the microgrid level is also a very big trend. And part of that is from the increasing amount of distributed energy resources we have on the grid, and then how that can interplay with the rest of the system while also being self-sufficient within its own area. And so in places here like Colorado, we have a lot of design interest or planning interest in these sort of districts for greenfield developments. But then in a lot of the other areas of the country, such as the Northeast, we have interest in seeing redevelopment of brownfield into zero energy districts as well.
And just to sort of drill in on that, are you seeing the demand for those districts come from the cities themselves, from the real estate developers? Is customer or tenant demand driving it? What are those factors?
It's all of the above, really. So there's a lot of customer-driven desire to have these, but then there's also developer interest in providing that service to their customers. And from the city level as well, there's quite a bit of interest in how this can help reshape the different cities.
So you mentioned the interest that's happening in Colorado. I think the Denver metro area is a really good example of that. So, Scott, I'd like to go to you. Thinking about Denver International Airport, which is a large landowner in this region and also being owned by the city and county of Denver, I understand there are aspirations to transform this airport region into really an airport-centric metropolis in some sense. So what kind of perspective do you bring to that?
Well, I think that's one of the unique things about Denver International Airport. We're currently 22 years old, but we're getting ready for the next prolonged period of growth within our life cycle. And so we have expansion programs going on within our main terminal area, within our passenger loading gate areas. But probably most relevant to this conversation is the fact that we are a significant landowner. The airport sits on 53 square miles of property, and we have a Den real estate team that is focused on the commercial development of certain nodes within that area. And so when we think about how we want to be growing as an airport, we have a very unique opportunity to do it in a way that is sustainable, is energy efficient, is innovative, and that's why it's exciting for us to be working with partners like National Renewable Energy Lab, like Panasonic, like Xcel Energy, and like Full & Wider, who is our landowner partner here at Peña Station Next.
Fantastic. So we have this new rail line that has opened, and it parallels Peña Boulevard, which is the way you would get to the airport if you were driving there by car. So if we think about that Peña Boulevard corridor, at the eastern terminus of it is the airport itself. Peña Station Next, in some sense, is the western terminus, because if you go any farther west from us, then it's Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge. So those are the bookends of that aerotropolis. And Panasonic, George, was one of the first tenants to come in here. We officially moved into the facility in September 2016, so just past that one-year anniversary. And one of the teams that based out of this facility is City Now, which is Panasonic's North American Smart City group. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what's happening with Denver and with City Now?
Absolutely. So, as you may know, Panasonic next year celebrates our 100-year anniversary. Our DNA is in consumer electronics. However, in North America, less than 8% of our revenue comes from consumer electronics. In fact, many people know us as a TV maker. We don't even make TVs in the US. So in the last decade, we've really transitioned from a B2C to a B2B and B2G solutions provider, and part of that is really a smart city initiative. We got our start in smart cities really about 12 years ago in a town called Fujisawa outside of Tokyo, a 45-acre complex, former manufacturing complex, that we really turned in with several partners into the world's first sustainable smart town. It's a microgrid. It's got an incredible amount of technology embedded in it. And to me, the magic of Fujisawa, it'll have 1,000 families living there at 2020. There are about 600 families living there today. But the real magic is that the technology is everywhere and it's nowhere. It is a human-centric design, and it really provides a unique level of sustainability and resiliency. And so City Now is the North American strategy to bring our global smart city learnings to North America. Not all of those capabilities will transfer, and to bring new technologies into the smart city portfolio for Panasonic. So in 2014, we were looking to stand up our City Now business outside of our corporate headquarters in Newark, and we settled on Denver for several reasons. The airport had recently opened direct flights to Narita, Japan, which was very important to us. The new A line connecting downtown to the airport was extremely important to us. And to have this 382-acre development, Peña Station Next, where we could plant our flag, be the anchor tenant, and be the smart and sustainable general contractor for this living lab, where we're working with all of these incredible stakeholders from the City and County of Denver, Denver International Airport, Xcel Energy, LC Full & Wider, the master developer, RTD, and Colorado Department of Transportation. That constellation of stakeholders is really what drew us to Denver out of the many cities we were looking at. And so we're thrilled to be here in Peña Station Next, which, as I mentioned, is a living lab for all of the stakeholders. And that really serves three purposes: to vet emerging technologies, what's really going to work; to validate vendors, am I going to want to keep writing you checks for 20 years, right? And most importantly, to create a business case in a real world environment for broader deployment, whether it's in the city, in other developments, across the utility service territory, or for Panasonic across other opportunities.
Well, so mentioning Fujisawa, you referenced the microgrid. Here at Peña Station Next, there's also an award-winning microgrid that leverages both solar PV and battery energy storage. What are the primary components for that system?
The microgrid really is the backbone of what we're doing here at Peña Station Next. We have a 1.6 megawatt DC solar canopy on the Denver airport land. We have a 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt hour battery that is serving Panasonic's Technology and Operations Center. We have 260 kilowatts DC of PV on our roof, and so when the grid, if and when the grid fails, we will be served by that battery, and the solar on our roof will recharge the battery during daylight hours. We've got a very sophisticated building management system tied to the battery management system. So as that state of charge decreases, our dynamic demand response, our load in the building is also dynamically reduced. So in theory, during a sunny stretch, if we were without power for a sustained period, we could operate indefinitely.
Andre, I'd like to turn to you. George mentioned the battery, and battery energy storage technology has a lot of interest right now. It seems to be growing fast, although from a small base, and is sometimes described as a Swiss Army knife, that it's this one tool that can do many different things for the grid. And one of the interesting aspects of this project is how this particular battery energy storage system is delivering a suite of 5 or 6 different services to Xcel Energy and to your customers. And so could you walk us through what are those stack of services and how are you thinking about them?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, battery storage really is gaining a lot of interest in the utility space for all the different values that it can provide. We can do things like energy arbitrage, simply charging the battery when prices are low and discharging it when those prices are high. Solar time shifting, renewable integration, such as doing ramp rate control. If clouds come over and quickly deplete your solar generation, this can help stabilize or firm that output. We can do peak demand reduction, and that could be on a system-wide level in response to a system-wide demand response event, or to help mitigate feeder peaks by dispatching that battery when the feeder is at a peak condition. Also, we can potentially do ancillary services, such as frequency regulation. And then the battery offers, as George was mentioning, the ability to microgrid or provide backup power to end customers like Panasonic.
And with a stack of services like that, how do you even contemplate the idea of what their hierarchy is? How do you prioritize, and can some of them run concurrently?
Yeah, that's a great question, because part of what Xcel is trying to learn from this demonstration project is how can we stack all those different value propositions, and what is the right hierarchy within our service territory to dispatch those. Which of those value streams are mutually exclusive? I mean, you can't do one while providing the other service. Over the course of the next 2 years, we'll be running several different modes of operation on this battery to see how we can best squeeze the most economic value out of that battery system by stacking those various value streams.
Well, Bryce, we have, as Andre described, a battery that's in a fairly complex mode of operation. As George described, an anchor load, the Panasonic facility that has this intelligent energy management system. Whether it's at the level of an individual building or if we scale up to a net zero energy district, how crucial is that intelligent energy management piece to making the whole system work?
Definitely, it's absolutely critical. So whether we're talking about at the transmission level, the distribution level, or sort of at the microgrid level, the interplay between the supply sources and the demand sources is key here. So if you have smart loads, you want to be able to look out ahead and understand how you're going to operate those, say, a couple hours in the future, because maybe your generation is going to be lower at that time. And so it's really this interplay between the generation technologies, the demand side, and then any storage technologies you have as well. And being able to do that automatically is absolutely critical to get the most efficiency and value out of these different technologies.
And Pete, I think one of the really exciting parts of Denver International Airport's partnership in this project is that when I talk about the growth, our growth has a lot of really positive benefits from a passenger perspective, but we accept the fact that our growth is going to come with some really significant energy demands. And given that we are a 24/7, 365 facility, we realize that as we grow, there's going to be even more increasing energy demand. We're already one of the largest demand centers within Xcel's service territory, and the fact that we can be part of this project and understand what kind of solutions there are both on a local level but also a regional level is going to be really important to us as we continue to grow.
Great. Well, George, you want to add to that?
Well, what
please?
I would add is, as a customer connected to the battery, we have a 4-hour minimum, which is fantastic, but it really begins to change our initial capital investment and operating investment expense profile. We're sitting in front of our Network Operations Center, which is a mission-critical facility for monitoring solar assets we have distributed around the country, all of the smart and sustainable technology we have at Peña Station Next, as well as our connected vehicle program with Colorado Department of Transportation. We did not put a diesel generator to back up our Network Operations Center, this mission-critical load, because we are using the battery. I mean, when you have that capability, you can really begin to redesign and rethink some of these more carbon-centric standby solutions.
Thank you, George. Scott, I want to come back to you. Thinking about the generation assets, mentioning that the airport is a large load center here, that you also have a lot of your own renewable generation. I want to focus briefly on the 1.6 megawatt DC solar carport because the airport was really a crucial partner in making that happen. And I think one of the other unique aspects of this microgrid project in general is that collaborative public-private partnership. And that solar canopy would not have happened without, I think, the commitment and leadership from Den as well. So what did you bring to that piece of the project with Xcel Energy?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important lessons to be learned from this, is that projects at this scale and at this level of complexity can only happen when you have a series of engaged partners like we have here. Because in the case of the solar canopy on the Den-owned parking lot, while it is hosted on canopies that were purchased by the City and County of Denver, it's actually an Xcel Energy energy generation asset. And so the fact that we were able to find those partnerships to be able to have the city build the infrastructure for the solar canopies, which provides a benefit to us because it provides covered parking at a revenue generating lot, but then be able to partner with Xcel to be able to have Xcel own and operate that asset. We found ways to make complicated issues much more easier to manage and to implement based on the partnerships that we've developed.
And so just for clarity then, the parking lot is the airport's,
Correct.
Including, I'd add, I think, 11 electric vehicle charging stations. The canopy structure is the airport's. The solar PV panels that sit on it are owned and operated by Xcel Energy.
That's right.
Correct.
Okay. And so, Andre, what was that process like to make that work technically, contractually?
Yeah, so it was a very interesting project from the standpoint, this has been Xcel Energy's first solar deployment where we actually own the assets of any size. We have several large utility scale projects, but those are all contracted through power purchase agreements where we're acquiring the power that way. So this was our first owned solar installation. And one of the challenges with this was actually on the contracting side. We had two very willing partners, Xcel Energy and DIA. They wanted to make this project happen, but just because neither one of our large entities had done this before, just getting through that contracting phase, I think actually took longer than installing the carport system itself.
And we all have similar goals on this project, and we all have similar goals related to sustainability, related to renewable energy. And I think one of the things that Denver International Airport is well known for in the sustainability space is renewable energy, because even before this project, we host 10 megawatts of solar PV at our facility, but then taking that model, which previously was always based on PPAs, and finding another way to facilitate additional solar generation. It can be challenging sometimes, but again, as Andre said, having willing partners that have good business relationships and are able to work together helps to make that as easy as it can be within the sometimes bureaucratic space that we all work in.
Okay, so we have a lot of progressive stakeholders at the table or today on the panel. And so, Andre, I want to come back to Xcel Energy briefly and sort of pat you on the back because I think you're too humble to thump your chest for us. That Xcel is really quite a progressive investor-owned utility. For a number of years running, a leading utility with wind power. Solar is a growing part of your portfolio. And fairly recently, Xcel Energy unveiled Our Energy Future, this strategic vision. How are you thinking about the future of utility?
Yeah, so As you said, we have been the nation's #1 wind provider for the last 12 years running. So we're quite proud of that fact. Excuse me. We have what we call our energy future, which is the vision of how Xcel Energy is going to continue to power technology, power the economy and economic development, and empower our customers by providing them energy choices. As part of that, last month we filed for a $2.5 billion investment in additional renewable and renewable generation projects, which would include 1,000 megawatts of wind and 700 megawatts of utility scale solar projects.
Those are some impressive big numbers.
Yeah.
So empowering customers, and George, I want to come to you to take a different angle on that customer perspective. Denver right now is one of the hottest real estate markets in the country, and that's not just what's happening at Peña Station Next. Right. You can look at the National Western Complex, the Sun Valley neighborhood, which is adjacent to the Denver Broncos Stadium. From the perspective of real estate development, how do you think about that customer piece? Andre spoke about it with Xcel in terms of customer empowerment and choice. There's also a piece around customer demand and what they're looking for. So how are you thinking about that?
Well, at the end of the day, cities and developers are both competing for businesses and residents, right? They really are. And so developers and cities that we engage in are increasingly focused on sustainability pardon me, and resiliency, and how can, from a developer's perspective, either it's Peña Station Next or another development, Sun Valley Eco District, any of these developments either in Denver or around the country, how can they make them more attractive to commercial tenants, to residents, so that they can essentially command a premium in the market? How can cities attract Amazon HQ2 or the next large corporate headquarters? It's a mix of smart city technologies, from smart mobility, smart energy, smart buildings. It really is a mix of these capabilities that make cities more attractive and make private developments more attractive because, again, they're more sustainable, they're more resilient, they offer a better quality of life.
And Scott, I think, as you mentioned, the airport is a large landowner. I think you said 53 square miles?
52 square miles.
So, and some of that is here at Peña Station Next. A lot of what you've done from a sustainability and a smart technology standpoint is sort of in the owned sphere of the airport itself, but there's also this halo effect of what you're doing with some of your land holdings and the kinds of tenants that you're attracting. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say. I think what you're touching on really is the big question that we're all trying to answer definitively with this development. I think across this panel, we're all in agreement that there are some real customer benefits associated with being at a development like this. But I think it's fair to say that within the market, that is still a bit of an unanswered question. And so certainly there are going to be some organizations that are looking for development opportunities that are going to be drawn to Peña Station Next based on exactly the type of work that we're doing. But I think the other part of what we're doing is trying to make that argument for them, to show that through using sustainable energy solutions, reliable energy solutions, low carbon energy solutions, we can actually make a value proposition that is going to make that case on our behalf, to show that being at a place like Peña Station Next is actually not just in the interest of the developers who are building this development, but also in the best interest of the people who are going to come here to be building their facilities.
Well, Scott, I think you used 3 words. You said sustainable, reliable, or I'm going to swap in resilient, and you said low carbon, which unintentionally gives me the perfect segue to come back to Bry, and net zero energy districts, which I think check all 3 of those boxes. And so, Bry, first, I just want to get acquainted with NREL's work in that realm with ESIF and other parts, sure. ESIF being the Energy Systems Integration Facility, and some of your other teams. What's that scope of experience at NREL that you all have?
So at NREL, we are a research organization, right? We're a Department of Energy-owned laboratory, and we do research on energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies. And so a big part of that in the past few years for us has been taking a lot of the traditional work that we've done in energy efficiency at the building level and then taking that up more toward the district level. In the context of the Peña Station project, we've been working with one of our tools, which is called UrbanOpt, as in urban optimization, in which we can model individual buildings within the district and then go through different scenarios of, let's say, energy efficiency or demand response programs and see how that impacts the design of the entire system. And what's been very interesting that we've done, especially in this specific project, is connecting that also with the electricity infrastructure so that we can start seeing the implications of, let's say, different energy efficiency options or additional energy storage, and what impact that then has on the distribution network as well. And so that's been something that we've been very excited to partner with here, because it's taking a lot of our computational models that we've been developing over the last few years and bringing them really into this real world environment, helping to improve them, but then being able to, every time I come to the airport, see the results of that as well.
So just for clarity, I think when we described that CarbonNeutral District project, that was officially announced summer of 2017, involves all of the partners at this table and others. But George, how do you think about, how does that take the solar+storage microgrid and now propel it a quantum leap forward with net zero energy, carbon neutral energy planning?
Right. So as I mentioned, Peña Station Next is a living lab. And part of that, the microgrid, we're a net power positive development, which is fantastic because of our solar assets. Being able to push in all directions and on the energy front, create a carbon neutral district energy plan is important for many reasons. Being able to integrate the distribution network model with the building model, that's very innovative. Being able to create a carbon neutral district energy plan that makes economic sense for the vertical developers is critical. Being able to create a business model for utilities like Xcel to be able to participate in this going forward is also very important. And at the end of the day, the result in particular for cities seeking to achieve their 2030 or 2050 carbon reduction goals, to do that, you have to pick all of the low-hanging fruit, and you better be up at the top of the tree getting some of that big, fat, ripe stuff. And being able to replicate carbon neutral energy districts within cities is going to be essential to them achieving their deep carbon reduction goals.
And I think a point that George just made is a really important one to highlight for the audience, that while I think we've all talked about some of the innovation that's coming from this, the work at Peña Station Next, the work with NREL on the carbon neutrality plan, it is not sustainability for sustainability's sake. It is not pie in the sky, philosophical thinking. This is about doing something real on the ground. And the only way that that happens is through making it cost effective, both on the development side, both on the customer side, as well as for the utility. And I think that's something that underpins everything that we're doing here, is that sustainability, renewable energy, microgrids only work if they make economic sense. And that's the other part of the value proposition that we are all so committed to making happen, is something that can actually happen in the real world, given all of the policy constraints, financial constraints that we all have as individual organizations.
And go ahead, please, Andre.
I was just going to say, and that's a key interest of Xcel Energy, is how can we make projects like this work where they don't have adverse rate impacts to all of our customers. We want to listen to what our customers are asking for, these renewable net zero communities. That's why we're investing so heavily in wind and solar. But at the same time, they don't want to see their bills go up. So through this effort and this modeling effort with NREL and Panasonic, we're trying to determine how can we provide a net zero energy community at the same time maintaining customers' rates.
So Pete, what I would add is, as Scott and Andre pointed out, microgrids and net carbon, carbon neutral district energy systems, it's not a technology challenge. It's a business model challenge, right? How can we create the business models that make sense for all of the stakeholders? And from our perspective, again, what drew us to Denver, it really begins with stakeholder alignment. The length of time it took to get the solar carport negotiated, as an example. Standing up the microgrid in particular, it was still accelerated because of the stakeholder alignment that we had here in Denver. And cities and developers sometimes like to jump to the shiny stuff, the solutions. And from our perspective, it always begins with stakeholder alignment, which then unlocks the P3 business models, which then enables the shiny stuff like microgrids to be deployed.
And Andre, I just expect that this is, forcing is too strong a word and the wrong word, but Xcel Energy is learning to flex some new muscles here as you innovate and think about customer choice, because I'd imagine that from a traditional utility business model standpoint, you hear words like net zero energy and throw your hands up, because that's kind of at a crossroads with how utilities have functioned, but now you're thinking differently about how you serve your customers.
Yeah, so we're thinking about how can we be involved in that net zero energy equation. Is it, can us as the utility be the owner of some of those distributed energy assets instead of everything being behind the meter or customer-owned assets? Perhaps there's a role for the utility to play in that, where we could own that asset, keeps us as a viable organization, giving the customer what they want. They want that clean energy, but they might not want the headache or the hassle of owning and operating generation assets.
And so you're disentangling customer-owned and customer-sited. So
Correct.
Now there's a utility role in there as well.
Yeah, correct. Just like this microgrid project, the carport solar and the battery storage system for the microgrid, those are Xcel Energy utility-owned assets, but they're physically located on the customer's property. So with Panasonic for the battery and the carport structure, as we mentioned, on DIA's parking lot.
Brian, George mentioned it's not necessarily a technological challenge. The real sticky questions are around business models, contractual relationships, those pieces. But I am curious about the technological side. Andre mentioned distributed energy resources. When we think about either net zero energy districts or pushing from net zero to carbon neutral, at a technological level, what does that really take? I understand this project is still in analysis, so the findings may be preliminary, but at least at a high level, what's that going to take?
Well, so I think the point George was making is that the costs have fallen so much for a number of these distributed energy resource technologies. So whether it's solar, whether it's storage, so from the individual technology level, that's pretty much solved, right? You can go out and buy PV at a fairly cheap price. You can go out and buy storage at a fairly cheap price. Where I think a lot of the technological challenges lie is in the integration of those, and doing so in the most effective way. So this is, having building energy management systems that talk to distribution management systems. How does that actually look? How do you have the communications to all these distributed technologies that allow you to have control over these resources? So really from the technological point of view, it's the integration of all these different types of technologies and how you efficiently and intelligently operate them. That's the real crux.
Excellent. We spent a lot of time talking about energy infrastructure at Peña Station Next, but George, I want to come back to you briefly. I did mention the electric vehicle charging stations at the Denver International Airport parking lot. There's more to Peña Station Next than its sustainable energy infrastructure, and I want to give viewers a sense for, without sending you down a long, deep rabbit hole, what else is going on here that wraps the fuller smart city context beyond the energy piece in particular?
It is a very long list of smart and sustainable technology that we are deploying here and will continue to deploy. We talked about the microgrid as the backbone of the development, pushing to carbon neutral. We've deployed the state's first smart streetlights. We are deploying smart parking, interactive digital signage, community Wi-Fi optimized for ultra-dense user environments, such as we'll have with Solar Decathlon. We are deploying autonomous electric vehicle shuttles. In fact, you mentioned the innovation district concept earlier. Peña Station Next is an innovation district, and one of those aspects is really having a cluster around a technology that really draws other members to that ecosystem. And this will be a smart mobility innovation district in particular. Again, there's a French autonomous shuttle company, EasyMile, will be opening their North American headquarters here this month in Peña Station Next. In addition, the project that I referred to with Colorado Department of Transportation, their RoadX project, which we are really supporting over the next 5 years, will bring connected vehicle technology to the state of Colorado at scale. And so we're doing all of that here in Peña Station Next. So from the smart mobility, the smart buildings, the smart streets, the smart energy, we have an incredible mix of technology for all of the stakeholders to evaluate and build a business case for when they make sense.
Great, very good. Before we transition to a little bit of Q&A, I do want to just give a plug for folks that if you're interested in learning more about some of the more technical aspects of the solar storage microgrid that's here, earlier this year we published a white paper on the project. Panasonic, Xcel Energy, and Unicos were the primary co-authors on that. But Scott at the airport, some of Bry's colleagues at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory were peer reviewers on that. So if you want to get a little bit deeper into the use cases for the battery energy storage system, how we're thinking about solar plus storage, that's all available in that white paper, which is available for free download. So I want to point that out as well. But with that said, I do want to turn back to the panelists and start to tackle a few questions that have been starting to come in. And so I think, Andre, I'm going to go to you first and thinking about distributed solar and how that's scaling. And I think there are examples in neighborhoods around Denver as well. As distributed solar has been scaling and storage is in this kind of catch-up race behind it to some degree, how are utilities like Xcel Energy thinking about grid integration of renewables as we get to higher and higher percentages?
Yeah, as I mentioned, one of the values that batteries can provide is for renewable integration. And along with this particular microgrid project that we're doing, we have also rolled out a project in the Stapleton neighborhood. Stapleton is actually the site of the old airport. Now it's a master planned development, and within that development we have some of the highest penetration of rooftop PV in our service territory. Actually, the penetration is so high that at times we see that classic duck curve from the California system on a particular feeder. So we're doing another demonstration where we're deploying some community sited energy storage systems and some behind-the-meter storage systems in customers' homes, which will really be used for solar time shifting, and they will help to flatten out that belly of the duck and store that solar energy when it's not needed in the middle of the day, and then dispatch it again in the evening hours once people come home.
Okay, and that duck curve being when daytime solar is cranking out, it's really suppressing to the point of
Correct.
Potential backflow on your feeders, and then the sun sets, the solar drops off, and now for a grid operator like Xcel, you've got to ramp up other generation assets to compensate for that.
Correct. There's actually times in the middle of the day where we have reverse power flow, where all the solar rooftop is actually pushing power back onto the bulk distribution, bulk transmission system instead of the other way around.
Okay, so storage being one way that you could think about tackling that challenge.
Correct.
I think that gives me a good segue into another question that we have here, Bri, that I think I'm going to toss to you first. Starting to drill on the storage piece, we've started to see energy storage, battery energy storage in particular, deployed at different scales. In California, they're looking at utility scale batteries as a grid peaker. In the PJM on the East Coast, we have frequency response batteries. In places like Tucson and Hawaii, we're seeing utility scale solar plus storage projects get built together. And then, of course, we have the commercial and residential behind the meter storage. Right. What do you see as storage future for the U.S. grid?
So there's all sorts of different functions that storage can play within the system, and its location and the type of technology you want to use is going to be slightly different for each of those. So you have storage that serves as, say, an uninterruptible power supply. So this is very different at very, very small time scales than you would have for seasonal usage of storage, which is one of the things that you have perhaps pumped hydro storage that Xcel's had historically. And so it really depends on the time scale. You can go from the milliseconds all the way up to these sort of months time scales. And where you locate that and what technology you use is going to be different for each of those applications.
Scott, you mentioned that the airport is about 22 years young, and now you're thinking about the next 22 years or even beyond. If you have a crystal ball with smart technology, sustainability, this airport metropolis in the making, what can we expect? I know that's asking a lot. There's a lot in that question.
Yeah, but it's what we're thinking about now. And I think one thing that has always set Denver International Airport apart is the fact that we are thinking proactively about the future. The decision that was made 25 years ago to move the airport from Stapleton to its current location was a very challenging public policy question. And the fact is that because we were proactive then, we are now in the position that we are, that we have the 6th largest airport in the United States that is positioned to grow in really dramatic ways. And I think that's exactly the phase of development that we're currently in. As we think about where we are now compared to the full build out of the airport, we are committed as an airport that invests in sustainability to be thinking proactively about how we can fuel that growth with sustainable energy so that we can make sure that we can continue our mission of connecting the people of Denver and the Denver region to the rest of the world, and that we can do it in the most sustainable ways possible. And the fact that all of the planning decisions that are taking place are happening in that context, are happening using the intellectual capacity of our region, and including the organizations that are part of this panel today, is really exciting for us because it helps us to know that there is a path forward that is innovative, that is sustainable, that is going to support our community and all of the ways that are so critical to us from a sustainability perspective.
Very good. Well, we're watching and we're excited, so we will wait and see.
Great.
I think we have time for one more question. So George, I'm going to toss this one over to you. And with this question, we're going to come back to the microgrid. This microgrid we have sometimes heard talked about as a microgrid with fuzzy boundaries or a hybrid microgrid because when you're in that islanded mode, there's one set of boundaries that you draw, and that's what's behind the switch, and that's on backup power. But when we're in that normal day-to-day grid interactive mode, that battery energy storage system that Andre described is interacting with utility assets, including the solar carport, that are on the other side of the islanding switch. So by some strict definitions, that's not in the microgrid, but it is, because the assets are interacting. What other microgrids have you seen that you think are noteworthy, whether they're residential, utility, commercial, whatever those might be?
Well, we're certainly deploying a wide variety of microgrids across the globe. I talked about Fujisawa as a very sophisticated and relatively mature microgrid, serving a community of 600 homes going to 1,000. And what's also interesting there is they make that resiliency available to the wider community. It's not just the homes there, but nearby residents could also come in times of need for resilient benefits. But in Japan in particular, there's other microgrids that we're deploying. Residential focus would be in Shiosawa. And we've got more of a commercial focused microgrid in Tsunoshima. Okay? We are also working quite extensively in Canada in the province of Ontario with BC Hydro on their smart microgrid, University of Ontario on more of an academic focused microgrid, and with Live Communities, really deploying a solar+storage microgrid in a residential community where it is where the cost of that solar+storage is really included in the mortgage, in a sense, making it much more making it easier to actually scale and implement. And the one comment I would make on solar+storage is storage, many people think of it as the holy grail to really expanding PV, and that's going to be driven by cost per kilowatt hour. And from our perspective, it's going to be the widespread EV adoption that drives the cost per kilowatt hour down to the point that utility scale distribution and community scale storage becomes much more cost effective, right? It's an inverse proportional relationship where linear decreases in cost can lead to exponential increases in storage deployment. So we're very excited about that broadly because it will really expand the market for microgrids because they just become more cost effective.
It's a very interesting time for sure. So that, unfortunately, brings us to time for this webinar. So firstly, to the viewers, thank you for tuning in. Secondly, on behalf of Panasonic, thank you to our panelists, Andre Guin from Xcel Energy, Scott Morrissey from Denver International Airport, Brian Matthias Hodge from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and George Karianis from Panasonic City Now. If you'd like to learn more about this and other projects that Panasonic is up to, please visit panasonicmovesus.com. And thank you very much again for tuning in to Energy and the Future of Smart Cities.